Did you know that green sea turtles are one of the only species in the world that grows up and in its juvenile years is a carnivore and then switches to a herbivore? Kind of sounds like me. But in today's podcast episode, you get to learn about that and a whole bunch more things. All about green sea turtles, how they nest, a bit about their migration, and why it's so important to protect them. I want to share with you guys a little bit about the podcast, since it's available on all the streaming platforms, Spotify, iTunes, etc. But I also wanted to have you guys, my YouTube peoples, be able to listen to it. So you can just sit back, relax, let it play, or read the blog post, join Patreon, where you can become a patron and see behind the scenes things, vote on what podcasts you want to hear. Let me know if this is okay with you guys. I just want to share some of the amazing people I've had the chance to meet on the podcast, and it's just something I'm really passionate about, so I hope you like it. It would mean the world to me if you listen to it. But let me know down below what you think. What is the most surprising fact about turtles for you? Oh, and I think there should also be specific timestamps in the description if you want to hear particular things about sea turtles. So I'll see you guys in the next video. And yes, this episode is sponsored by my patrons. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video.
Because the interesting thing about green turtles is that when they're sexually mature, they're the only herbivorous species of sea turtles.
Mm-hmm.
But before they reach sexual maturity, they're actually omnivorous. So they basically eat anything they want. So as they become mature, they start to transition their diets from being an omnivorous sea turtle to a primarily herbivorous sea turtle.
That's amazing.
So it's really cool. I don't know why they do that, but it's really cool that the green turtles are the only species of sea turtles that does that.
I swear, no matter how many times I learn about sea turtles, talk to sea turtle experts, I learn something new every time. It's amazing. These creatures are absolutely fascinating, and you will love this episode where I chat to Melissa Chan all about sea turtle conservation in Malaysia. We talk about the local traditions of eating sea turtles and how the tide is shifting and create more turtle protected areas. This episode is fascinating, so if you're interested in getting into turtle rescue and volunteering, if you want to learn about amazing NGOs that are working out there to protect our sea life, then this one is for you. Thank you so much for listening and being part of the Ocean Pancake family. Make sure to join the Facebook group for all the latest updates and talking to the 1,000 other ocean warriors who are in this fight to protect our oceans and our seas. If you want to hear me interview anyone else, please send me an episode on oceanpancakepodcast@gmail.com or check out the website oceanpancake.com. I love hearing from you guys, so let me hear what you're interested in seeing, and let's get into it. Every day there's a new news story about the crisis facing our ocean, whether it's the plastic issue, overfishing, pollution. If the oceans die, we die. Fortunately, we have plenty of environmental activists, marine conservationists, and eco-warriors who are out there every day fighting to protect our oceans and our Earth. On the Ocean Pancake podcast, we're going to be hearing from some of them about how to decrease our environmental footprint, go plastic-free, participate in ocean conservation, cleanups, and even maybe some marine science. So, welcome to the Ocean Pancake podcast, where the goal is sustainability and living a turquoise life. My name is Kat Andriskova, and I'm your host today. Let's get into this week's episode. Hi, and welcome to the Ocean Pancake podcast. Today I am here with Melissa Chan, who is the project manager of Perhentian Turtle Organization. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for welcoming me, Kat.
No problem. I'm so excited to have you here because turtles are one of my favorite creatures, and I'd love to learn more about them. So could you share with us a little bit your story of how you first got involved with turtle conservation?
My story started as like something kind of not planned. I didn't start off like wanting to work with turtles. I think when I was young, I definitely was really into marine biology, and I kind of stumbled into sea turtle conservation, more for just like having a first experience of what it's like to be working in conservation, in marine biology, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And so I found out about like this sea turtle organization in Malaysia.
Hmm.
And yeah, that was how it all started.
That's amazing. And what exactly brought you to Malaysia in particular? Where are you from originally?
So I am from Malaysia. I'm Malaysian,
Hmm.
and I come from the main city called Kuala Lumpur.
Hmm.
So in Malaysia, like marine biology and marine conservation is like very, very like a rare niche, I would say. Because we're very like Asian in the sense that everyone is still pursuing like a career in business or
Yeah.
medicine, those typical things. So obviously when I told people, even my family, that I want to do like marine biology, marine conservation, they're slightly shocked. Relatives are like, why?
Mhm.
But my parents tried to be supportive. So when I told them this, they urged me to look for, volunteer programs that will help me gain better experience in it, because clearly I wouldn't be getting any in the main city. Yeah, so that was how I basically started my journey.
That's amazing. I mean, Malaysia is one of those places in the world where it has some of the most incredible biodiversities. And one, I've actually been to Kuala Lumpur, but I haven't had a chance to dive um, in the surrounding areas. Can you tell people a little bit about what the ocean's like there and what kind of sea creatures live there and the temperature, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so well, it really depends on where you are in Malaysia, because
Hmm.
obviously if you're in like, so Malaysia has two, how would I say, like kind of two main land masses. So one is
Hmm.
the peninsula of Malaysia, which is directly below Thailand and just above Singapore, and then we have Borneo, Malaysia, which is on the Borneo Island. We share it with Indonesia and Brunei.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're on the west coast of Peninsula Malaysia, where it's very developed, so most of the main cities are there. The oceans there aren't very nice, just because there are a
Uh-huh.
lot of like shipping lanes, and as you can
Hmm.
imagine, where development usually exists, the surroundings aren't always as nice and pristine.
Hmm.
But if you go over to like the east coast of Peninsula Malaysia and also to Borneo, Malaysia, the waters there are a lot nicer. I would say they're about like turquoise. They're clear, clear turquoise waters. You can usually see the bottom, on a nice, calm, clear ocean day. If it's like, down to 5 meters, sometimes even up to like 6 to 7 meters, you can still see the bottom.
Oh, wow.
And because we're basically part of the coral triangle, so we do have a lot of basically tropical marine animals, the coral reefs, the fishes, we've got turtles. We have very few marine mammals, just because our waters are quite warm. I would say the coolest it'll ever be is 27, 28 degrees Celsius.
Oh, that sounds
Um,
amazing.
and the warmest is usually like more than 30. Obviously, that like the most uncomfortable ones I've been is like 33, 34 degrees, just because it kind of feels like bath water.
Yeah.
But yeah, because it's kind of too warm for most marine mammals, so we rarely see them. But sometimes, like where we are on the Perhentian Islands, we do see dolphins. If you're out on a boat, we do see dolphins. We do get whale sharks. But I think besides that, the main marine megafauna we get are sea turtles.
So, what species of sea turtles do you get over there?
So in Malaysia we get four, but in the Perhentian Islands we have only two. So the four species in Malaysia are the green turtles, the hawksbills, the olive ridleys, and the leatherbacks, which we usually say now are locally extinct. And in the Perhentian Islands we get the green and the hawksbill turtles.
Why are the leatherbacks considered locally extinct? Have they just stopped coming there, or did their populations drastically decline? Do you know what caused that to happen?
So unfortunately it was humans. And Malaysia actually, if you are a person who's like very into sea turtles and you've read all the sea turtle textbooks in the
Hmm.
world, Malaysia usually pops up as a very unfortunately prime example of what not to do in sea turtle conservation.
Hmm.
Um So what happened was that Malaysia used to there's a beach on the east coast of Malaysia called Rantau Abang,
Yeah.
and it used to host, I would say, the second largest nesting population of leatherbacks in the world. And yeah, it was really popular both as a touristic spot, but also for people to take the eggs. And that was the main reason why their populations declined, because especially on the east coast of Malaysia, the people here, it's a cultural and historical thing for them to just consume sea turtle eggs. In the past, mainly because it was an easy source of protein, but obviously now, you know, when like you got chicken and beef and everything that's going on, so like they don't necessarily need it anymore, but people still eat it because it's like a delicacy, because it's getting rare, or just because they grew up with it and that's just what they like to eat. So people, basically there was no restriction or legislation around it. So people just basically took almost all the eggs most of the time whenever leatherback nested. And that happened all the way until the 1960s. So around the 1960s is when the population really started dropping to the point where hardly any leatherbacks came up to nest anymore. And actually by that time, obviously conservationists were also getting more aware about these things. So they tried doing their best to collect as many eggs as they can, maybe buying it from people who are collecting those eggs and incubating them. But it was also around the 1960s where sea turtle researchers were just discovering that the temperature of incubation determines the sex of the sea turtles. So warmer temperatures will produce more females and cooler temperatures will produce more males. But at the time, I suspect that the researchers might not have been aware of this. So they incubated the eggs a little bit too warm, like warmer than the optimal temperature to produce, you know, about 50-50. So they're producing mainly females and releasing them back into the ocean. So the last time we had a leatherback come up to nest in Malaysia was in 2017. It was just one leatherback. But unfortunately, she laid her eggs, but none of her eggs were fertile, which shows that, you know, even though she came back, there were no males in the surrounding population to mate with her to fertilize her eggs. Yeah.
That's very sad. And how come this happened just to the leatherbacks and the ridleys and greens and hawksbills kind of escaped the extinction in the area?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think it's because well, one, leatherbacks, because of their large size, they also lay larger eggs as well. And because they lay larger eggs, so they don't lay as many eggs as the other sea turtles. So, for example, a green turtle can lay between 80 to 120 eggs. But I think leatherbacks only lay, like, I think definitely less than 80 or less. Um, and also, compared to the green turtles and the hawksbills that nest basically all over Malaysia, so they can be found on this east coast, they can be found on Borneo, Malaysia, a few even nest on the west coast of Malaysia as well. The leatherbacks nesting locations were a bit more, I would say, specific to certain parts of the east coast only. So, and because everyone knew where the leatherbacks were, because it was also a touristic thing to, you know, basically do turtle watching while the leatherbacks were laying their eggs. So everyone knew where they were, and they just collected all the eggs, and there weren't that many to begin with. So, and I think that's why.
It's very sad that they're not there, but luckily now with all these organizations, the greens and hawksbills and olives have a chance to keep their populations up. Is it still quite regular for Malaysian people to eat turtle eggs now?
I would say there's definitely a downward trend, and more regular definitely on this part of Malaysia. But, you know, obviously if you go into Kuala Lumpur and stuff, you definitely won't find anyone selling sea turtle eggs, at least not openly. Even if they do, it's really, really rare. But on this part of Malaysia, the East Coast, there is a market called Pasar Payang. And over there, you know, you can just walk in and people are just openly selling sea turtle eggs. That's mainly because there is a flaw in our legislation. So, you know, after we realized what we have done to our leatherbacks, the Department of Fisheries quickly came up with like some enactments to protect sea turtles. So for leatherbacks, it is illegal to do anything with them. Basically, you cannot take their eggs, you cannot harvest them. Yeah, even you can't even touch them and stuff like. So they're completely protected in all life stages. But for the other sea turtles, because they're, I guess at the time compared to the leatherbacks, their populations weren't as critical as the leatherbacks. So the protections for those species were a bit more lax. So I'm not sure about the olive ridleys, but for the green turtles and the hawksbills, for sure, if only certain beaches where they nest in are protected under the law. So if it's recognized by the law to be a protected beach, if you take any eggs from those beaches, then that is considered illegal. But if it's a beach that is not protected, but a green turtle nests there, and you take those eggs, it is technically not illegal. I wouldn't say that it's legal because obviously it's not in the law either, but it's definitely not illegal. And that's where the flaw is, because obviously once you take the eggs from a beach, whether it's protected or not, and you put it into the market, it's almost impossible to trace it back to which beach it came from. So so I can easily, like if I take take eggs from a protected beach and bring it to the market and sell it, if someone asks me, so did this come from a protected beach or not, I can easily say, oh no, it was from a non-protected beach, so it's technically legal for me to sell it. And there's no way for them to correct me on that. Yeah.
And in the protected beaches, are there patrols or are there people protecting the beaches? Because I find one of the biggest issues in ocean conservation I've seen is, despite the laws and the good intentions, there's just not enough enforcement for it to apply.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how well enforced it is, or like how how would I say it? Like the coverage, I guess, of the enforcement for like the other beaches, because I myself don't know how many beaches there are on this east coast or around Malaysia that are protected. But for example, in the islands closer to where I'm working in, so the Perhentian Islands, and then another island south of this, which is Redang Island, there are at least 5 to 6 beaches that are protected on each of these islands. They are protected under the law. And so for both of these islands, the Department of Fisheries have hired local people from the local community to be rangers. So they're paid a small allowance for them to be doing night patrols. So in Redang Island, each ranger kind of has their own jurisdiction of which beach they have to be at. So they just basically camp there and wait for the turtles and relocate the eggs either to the hatchery or just leave them to incubate naturally. And then in Perhentian Islands, we have a few beaches around the islands where the rangers will be on 2 boats and patrolling the different islands looking for turtles and their eggs. And then when they collect those eggs, they relocate them into a hatchery. So I think the government definitely have made efforts to, make sure that these protected beaches are protected. But, sometimes, for example, in Perhentian, if you already patrolled that beach and you're patrolling a different beach and someone comes in at the time that you are not around and manage to get the eggs before you do, then that is when poaching happens as well. Yeah.
And what is your particular organization's goal, or where do you work and what kind of work do you do?
So the Perhentian Turtle Project, basically the overarching aim is definitely to conserve the sea turtles of the Perhentian Islands. And the first step that we needed to do, and that we are still doing, is to monitor the sea turtle population, because we only started in 2015. And when we started, we realized that there wasn't much or any research or data published about the Perhentian Island sea turtle population. So basically, we didn't know how many turtles there are that we're dealing with, where they go, what they do, and how many species there are. So what we did first was just try to monitor the population, but because we started out as a small organization without many resources, so we chose to do it in a way that requires the least amount of resources, which is through photo ID. We basically photo identify the sea turtles using their facial scales, because the patterns are unique to each individual. It's kind of like our fingerprints. So so we will use those facial scales to ID and distinguish between individuals and try to form a database to at least know, okay, in this population, we have this many individuals. And then from there, we can start monitoring any decreasing or increasing trend. So that's one. And then another thing that we do is we also have permits to be on one of the fisheries protected beaches, one of the main ones where they have their hatchery, to assist the rangers to monitor the nesting population. So we would also respond to, if a turtle comes up to lay her eggs, then we will collect biometric data, also take pictures for ID, and we will also relocate her eggs into the hatchery. And if, there are any hatchlings coming up in the hatchery, then we would also release them as well. Yeah.
And how long have you
So
been doing this work over there? So how many years of data have you managed to accumulate?
The project itself, we've been collecting data since 2015. So I would say this year is our 6th year, I think, of collecting data. For me personally, as the project manager, I only started in 2018. So this is my 3rd year. But I have been like a volunteer with the project for a few times. So before 2015, the project kind of like started out very unofficially, I would say. They kind of like tested the waters a bit with different resorts and different locations. And I volunteered with them during those times. And then I also joined them as an intern before I became the project manager. Yeah.
And have you been seeing any trends upwards or downwards of the populations?
Based on personal observation, how do you say? It does seem like there is a decreasing trend, especially with the nesting population. But the difficult thing about sea turtles is that, one, they live very long lives and they're very migratory species, which means that, for example, with the nesting population, they only nest every few years. So our population, we always expect turtles to come back every 2 to 3 years. And so for us to determine whether the trend is decreasing or not, we need, so every 2 to 3 years, that's what we call a cycle. So we need at least 3 cycles to have occurred before we can safely say that, oh yes, there is a decreasing trend. So for now, because we started collecting data in 2015, we are only currently in our 2nd cycle of data collection. And so we would need at least 3 more years of data collection to start comparing it. But if it's just up to me to say something, not as a scientist, and not to like publish anything, there is quite a decrease. For example, in 2016, we had about 100 plus turtles nesting at our beaches. But then, 2 to 3 years after that would be around 2019. And in 2019, we didn't get all our turtles coming back to nest. We only got, I would say, 10% of those, if not fewer. But we also had a few new turtles coming up. So it's both sad and exciting at the same time. Like, it's sad that we didn't get all our turtles coming back and only like 10% of what we initially had. But it's also slightly exciting because we know that there are still new individuals in the population to kind of buffer that. Yeah. But in total, comparing 2019 and 2016, just the number of individuals, 2019 definitely had fewer individuals than 2016.
Well, I guess we're going to have to see what the trends are looking like in the next few years, just because it's hard to tell, because it takes them so long to reach sexual maturity as well. I mean, you guys are looking at the greens and hawksbills. So what does their typical life cycle look like?
Yeah, so I'll talk mainly about the green turtle because it's the species I work most closely with, so I'm definitely more familiar with them. For a green turtle, I usually like to start with the nesting turtle. So a nesting mom will come up and she can lay anywhere between 80 to 120 eggs per clutch. And she actually can come up to lay 5 to 7 times in a season. And actually those number of times differs for each population. So you can have some populations in China or in Philippines, for example, that only lays like 2 to 3 times in one season. But in the Perhentian Islands, our average is about 5 to 7. We've had some turtles nesting 9 times in one season.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And
do you know what why that happens? Like why some nest more than others?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't really read any papers that specifically explains all of these yet. Doesn't mean that obviously that there are no papers out there. I'm sure there are people who have done research, but I haven't gotten to those yet. But my suspicions have something to do. I think it has something to do with how far the sea turtles are migrating and how much fat storage they have. Because when sea turtles, they don't. Again, different populations, even within the same species, vary a lot. So some populations can nest every single year, and some populations will nest every 2 to 3 years. So populations that don't nest every year, they're actually spending those years in between to just build up their fat storage to start the migration, because some research suspects that when sea turtles are breeding and nesting, they actually don't eat much. Like they're basically fasting. So they're relying a lot on their fat storage to produce those eggs, to mate, and to basically survive during the whole nesting time before they start migrating back towards their feeding grounds. And because sea turtles can migrate very, very long distances, so between Malaysia to Japan, some migrate closer between Malaysia to Vietnam as well. But I think, like maybe the distance that they're migrating, and depending on how much food they're getting every time they are feeding and building up their fat storage, I think those factors may be affecting, how basically fertile a nesting turtle is and how many patches of eggs she can produce. Yeah.
Okay, so once she comes up onto the nest, how did you mention how long they incubate, and then what the temperature is that determines whether they're male or female?
Yeah, so when a turtle has laid her eggs, then those eggs will take about 45 to 60 days to incubate in the sand. And like I mentioned earlier, the temperature of the nest determines whether the hatchlings come out as males or females. So warmer temperatures will produce more females, and cooler temperatures will produce more males. So once after 45 and 60 days have passed, then the hatchlings will hatch, and then they'll come up onto the beach, dig their way out. And then they usually come out at night just because it's a lot cooler, and ideally fewer predators on land, so on the beach. So once they're all out, then they'll scurry down the beach into the water, and then they'll start what we call a swimming frenzy. So they just keep swimming nonstop until they reach open ocean. And because they're swimming nonstop, they're relying on they have a little yolk sac at the bottom of their belly. And so they're relying on that yolk sac to fuel their energy while they're doing their swimming frenzy. Once they reach the open ocean, that is where they will just kind of, drift with the currents, maybe swim a bit here and there, and just feed on anything that's smaller than them. So it can be, tiny little crustaceans like shrimp. It can be tiny little fish or algae and stuff like that. And then they keep feeding, and then once they get bigger, reaching around juvenile stage, then for green turtles at least, they will start migrating towards coral reef areas, and that's where they will start feeding on like jellyfish, soft corals, sponges, and sometimes crustaceans and algae as well. And then as they keep growing bigger, as they keep getting towards the adult stage, they'll start migrating towards seagrass beds. Because the interesting thing about green turtles is that when they're sexually mature, they're the only herbivorous species of sea turtles. But before they reach sexual maturity, they're actually omnivorous. So they basically eat anything they want. So as they become mature, they start to transition their diets from being an omnivorous sea turtle to a primarily herbivorous sea turtle.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it's really cool. I don't know why they do that, but yeah, it's really cool that the green turtles are the only species of sea turtles that does that. And so once they start feeding on seagrass beds, obviously if they're not sexually mature yet, it's quite common to find, juveniles and subadults still going back and forth between coral reefs and seagrass beds to feed. But once they become sexually mature, then they feed primarily on seagrass, and then build up their fat storages. Once they feel like they're ready, then they start their migration back towards the general region that they first hatched from. So for example, if let's say a sea turtle hatched in the Perhentian Islands, for example in Beach A, they can migrate to the Philippines, they can migrate to Japan or anywhere else. And then when they're ready to nest and breed again, then they'll come back to the Perhentian Islands. They may go back to Beach A specifically. We've had a few sea turtles that nested all 9 times at the same beach, and we've also had some sea turtles nesting like 4 times in Beach A, 5 times in Beach B, and stuff like that. So like when people say that they come out to the same exact beach to nest, it's not entirely true. So yeah, but the general region that they hatch from, that's where they usually go back to.
That's amazing. And that is due to the imprintation apparently that they have on the beaches once they leave, or how exactly do they navigate back to the area?
Yeah, so that's also another cool thing about sea turtles, and I would say there are a lot of factors that go into that. Many different researchers have been trying to pinpoint specific factors, like which is the main one, but it's been really hard because there's just so many different variations. So the main one, I think, I would say, if let's say they're just hatchlings, they're imprinting on chemical cues from the beach itself, and then we believe that once they're out in the open ocean, they can actually start detecting the magnetic fields of the Earth. I believe there was like some research that they found little biomagnetites. So basically, they're like iron or little magnets in the sea turtles' brains. Birds have them too at the edge of their beaks for those migratory birds, and it seems that sea turtles have similar compounds in their brains as well. So they believe that it's those compounds that helps them detect the magnetic field of the Earth. And as they're hatchlings and imprinting on their location, both chemical cues and their magnetic location is what they're trying to, I guess, naturally remember. And some people also say that they also rely on ocean currents as well. Yeah, so many different factors. Some people even say that they actually can read like the stars.
Oh, wow.
I, yeah, it's really crazy. Like a lot of different experiments have been done. Just trying to figure out how they actually do it, and there is no one way. So it's really hard to say. But once they're out into the open ocean and they're growing, whether they're hatchlings or adults, they just start to drift with the currents, and then relying on their ability to detect the magnetic fields and stuff like that, they can just somehow find their way back. Yeah, it's just really complicated, and even I still find it like really amazing. But it's also because of this that researchers have found that because our Earth's magnetic field actually shifts every, I don't know how many years. I'm not a geologist, so I'm not quite sure, but it does shift. And because it is shifting, so people have actually detected that the sea turtles' nesting patterns have also kind of shifted. For example, if they shift from like region A to region F on a certain beach, in a few years, if the magnetic fields have shifted, they found that the sea turtles started nesting from region C to region, like I don't know, G or something like that. So they are slowly moving, and we suspect it might be because they're relying on the magnetic field, which is also shifting as well. Yeah.
That's incredible. So they're slowly shifting down. Well, I guess we'll see in a few years what keeps happening now that we're gathering data on them regularly.
Yeah.
And you were saying that humans are one of the big problems, not only in Malaysia but across the world when it comes to sea turtle populations. But what are some of the other threats that can be decreasing turtle populations?
hmm So if we're talking just like natural threats, there are
Mm-hmm.
quite a few, and it also really depends on where you are in the world. So for example, if we're just talking about Malaysia, the main ones are usually monitor lizards, crabs, for those, attacking on hatchlings and the eggs. So monitor lizards, crabs, ants as well, little red ants that live in the sand. And
Mm-hmm.
then there are like fungal infections that can decrease the success rates of eggs. And then once they're out and about, hatchlings, because they're so small, they can be eaten by literally anything. So same thing with the crabs and monitor lizards as well. Once they're in the water, any fish that are larger than them will eat them. So like groupers or sea bass and stuff. Sharks for sure, definitely. I think there was in the island south of here called Radang Island. There is a group of students conducting research on sharks. I think the relationship between shark predation and sea turtle hatchlings, and they found like a little baby shark washed up on their beach once. It was a black tip reef shark, and they decided to cut it up just to see what's in its stomach, and it was just filled with baby hatchlings. It was both incredible and scary at the same time.
Yeah.
So sharks are definitely one of the biggest predators. Even sometimes when we do hatchling releases at night, we're just walking down the beach. If the moon is out and the waters are calm, we can see into the water. And sometimes we'll just like notice a few sharks, especially baby sharks, just following us. So we feel like, oh, they know that we're gonna release the hatchlings. Um, So yeah, sharks definitely, and then birds as well. Eagles, hawks, seagulls sometimes eat baby hatchlings. But as sea turtles grow bigger, at least for the ones we have in Malaysia, um, the larger they grow, the fewer predators there are that can consume them because they have hard shells. So usually, once they are sexually mature and fully grown, the only ones that can really threaten them are tiger sharks, great
Hmm.
whites, and killer whales as well. But besides that, yeah, not many can attack them and predate on them. So they're only most vulnerable before they reach their full grown size. Yeah.
And then in terms of things like climate change or, plastic pollution, are those things impacting the sea turtles in Malaysia?
Yeah, I would say so. I personally haven't encountered any sea turtles where, the cause of death was definitely because of plastics, or like pollution per se. Fishing net entanglements, yes.
Hmm.
With boat strikes, which is I think a threat not commonly talked about when, we talk about like basically even marine megafauna in general. But boat strikes do happen just because where we are, it's a very touristic area, so lots of boat traffic, and sea turtles, they are air breathing animals, are they're reptiles, so they have lungs and they need to surface every few minutes to breathe. So if a boat is coming and they either can't avoid it in time or the boat doesn't see the turtle in time, a collision will happen where either if the turtle's lucky, it gets away with an injury that it will, heal and survive from.
Hmm.
But if it's unlucky and the boat really, clashes into it, then the sea turtle can actually die from a boat strike. So yeah, and then fishing net entanglement. I haven't seen one personally caught in fishing nets before, but we get a lot of sea turtles kind of already dead floating into the islands. And every time, if I have a local community member with me who witnesses it as well, they always
Hmm.
say like, "Oh, it must have died because it drowned from getting stuck in a net or something."
Yeah.
So yeah. And with climate change, it definitely impacts the nesting turtles for sure because we talked about how the incubation temperature affects the sex of the turtles. So with warming climates, we are expecting that more and more of the naturally hatched turtles will be females.
Hmm.
Some organizations around the world are already trying to like combat that with these suspicions. So some people are trying to incubate them in like polystyrene boxes, trying to keep them cool, or like really shade the area, shade the hatchery, so that it's not as hot as well. To kind of like skew the sex ratio back towards more males, so
Hmm.
that it produces like an overall relatively balanced sex ratio. um, yeah. So I think those are like the main factors. Yeah. Besides, like egg poaching and sea turtle hunting.
Hmm. That's well, it's good to know. And I always ask my guests, well, what is the one thing that they can do if they want to help the oceans or sea turtles in this case?
Mm-hmm. Obviously, so many different ways. Like it's so hard to like list them all down. It really depends on where you are and what your capacity is as a person. Many indirect ways that you can help, many direct ways. I always say to just start locally. If you're in a place that that has a lot of sea turtles coming up, either to nest or like that feeds around your area, like maybe check out organizations just like basically within your area that are doing sea turtle work, and try to support them in different ways. You can
Hmm.
volunteer, you can even donate or just like spread the word about them, because usually small organizations need the most help in doing their work. And if you have a bit more capacity to help, then definitely consider, like, and especially if you're in an area that doesn't have sea turtles, or you don't live anywhere close to the ocean but you really want to help as well, and if you have more resources to do it, then feel free to look for an organization elsewhere and travel there and help as well. And then, if you feel that volunteering is not really a thing, traveling is not really a thing, that's completely fine as well. Obviously, even within your own lifestyle, there's so many things we can change. I think the ones that everyone is talking about is reducing our plastic consumption, especially single-use plastics, trying to use as many reusable items as we can. And also the one thing I like to tell people is also just reducing waste production in general. It doesn't even matter if it's like single-use plastics. It can even be like food waste and stuff like that. Reducing our like carbon footprint and stuff is also really important, because for example, sometimes when we take the trash out and put it in the bigger bin outside, that's all we know, that's where it goes, and then the garbage truck comes and it takes it. But then after that, like, we don't know where it goes. We don't think about, where does our trash actually go? Does it get incinerated? Does it end up in a landfill, or do people just like dump it in the ocean? Because like there are islands out there made entirely of trash. And if landfills are piling up, or like if people are shipping their trash across oceans, things can just fall off the shipping container and I'm in the ocean. So even if you feel like, oh, I bagged my trash, I put it in a trash can, that's great, it might still end up in the ocean one way or the other. So I usually tell people, just try to reduce as much as possible in so many different ways. Yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for that. And I'll surely have all your details, your social medias, your website, available on the Ocean Pancake website. So everyone can go over there, check out the amazing work you're doing, and potentially support, because we need to support these organizations all over the world to help protect the sea turtle populations. So yeah, thank you, Melissa, so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kat, for having this conversation. Always love talking about sea turtles.
Oh, I know, I could keep going for hours, but have to cut it.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely understand.
All right. Thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So that was that. I hope you learned something new from Melissa. I know I certainly did, and I really enjoyed this episode. I swear, turtles are incredible, and it's amazing how little we know about them. So next time you see a sea turtle, just think about the mysteries that they have in their life. And yeah, help protect our oceans by making sure to decrease your carbon footprint. For all tips and tricks on how to decrease your environmental footprint, head on over to oceanpancake.com. If you would like to support me in the work I do, it would mean the world if you became a patron or donated or got yourself a Plastic is the Killer. I'm also having merch. Ocean Pancake merch that you can wear and support the podcast and support the sea. Thank you guys so much. Also, make sure to check out Graham Mose, who is the music in this podcast. He's absolutely amazing. Check him out on Facebook, or if you're in Brisbane, go and see a live show. Truly incredible, funky beats. You will not regret it. See you guys in the next episode. Also, I need a sign off. Can you guys think of a nice sign off? I don't know. Anyway, send me an email. Bye!